9 words hang on a wall in a Sunday school classroom, each one painted on its own wooden apple. Love. Joy. Peace. Patience. 9 separate pieces of fruit, 9 separate targets, 9 separate things to work on this year. That's how almost everyone reads Galatians chapter 5. As a checklist. Pick the one you're worst at. Try harder. Report back next Sunday. But Paul never wrote a checklist. Look closely at the actual Greek text, and something strange appears. The word fruit isn't plural. It's singular. 1 fruit, not 9 fruits. Paul had the grammar available to write fruits, and he didn't use it. That single choice changes everything about how this famous list is supposed to work. If it's 9 separate fruits, you could have 4 of them and be missing the rest. If it's 1 fruit with 9 features, you can't have patience without kindness quietly growing underneath it. This is the difference between a fruit basket and a single vine. And once you see which one Paul meant, the entire passage reads differently. The Greek word behind fruit is karpos, and it shows up all over the New Testament. It's the ordinary word for the produce of a tree, a vine, a field. Figs on a fig tree. Grapes in a vineyard. Grain multiplying in good soil. John the Baptist tells religious leaders to bear fruit in keeping with repentance, same word. Jesus says you'll recognize false prophets by their fruits, same word again. So karpos is flexible. It can appear singular or plural depending on what the writer means. In Galatians 5 verse 22, Paul makes a deliberate choice. Singular. One trusted way to understand it, think of a bunch of grapes instead of 9 separate pieces of fruit. Grapes on a single cluster aren't 9 independent objects. They're one growth, expressed 9 ways. You don't get to keep 3 grapes and toss the rest. The cluster is the point. Compare that to the sentence right before it. Paul lists sexual immorality, hatred, jealousy, rage, envy, and more. He calls these works of the flesh. Works, plural, versus fruit, singular. That contrast is not an accident of translation. Works describe something manufactured. Assembled by human effort, piece by piece, one behavior at a time. Fruit describes something grown. Produced by a living source, as a unified whole. Anyone can manufacture an isolated good deed through willpower for an afternoon. Only a living, connected root system produces fruit that holds together over years. To understand why this distinction mattered so much, you have to understand who Paul was arguing with. Galatians is written to churches under pressure from a group historians call the Judaizers. Their message was simple, and to many ears, reasonable. Jesus is good, but Jesus isn't quite enough. Gentile believers, they argued, also needed to keep the Jewish law. Circumcision. Dietary rules. Add the law to faith in Jesus, they said, and you get complete righteousness. Paul responds with some of the harshest language in any of his letters. He tells the Galatians they've been bewitched. He says a gospel that adds law to grace is no gospel at all. For Paul, the real danger wasn't circumcision itself. It was the underlying logic. If righteousness comes from rule-keeping, then righteousness is something you manufacture. Like works, plural. Paul's entire argument in Galatians is that the Spirit produces something rules never could. Not obedience extracted through external pressure, but character grown from an internal source. That's why the fruit and works contrast lands exactly where it does, in chapter 5. It isn't a side note about ethics. It's the climax of the whole letter's argument. Law says, perform, and you'll become righteous. Paul says, receive the Spirit, and righteousness will grow. Paul's list has an order, and the order isn't random. Many readers notice it falls into three natural clusters. The first three describe a believer's inward disposition before God. Agape, love. Not romantic affection, but committed, self-giving action toward another's good regardless of feeling. Chara, joy. Not circumstantial happiness, but a settled gladness rooted in something that outlasts circumstances. Irene, peace. Related to the Hebrew shalom, a wholeness that holds steady even inside real difficulty. The next three describe how that inward reality reaches other people. Macrothumia, patience, sometimes translated long-suffering. The refusal to retaliate even when provoked repeat. Krestos, kindness. Practical goodwill in action, not just a pleasant feeling toward someone. Agathasun, goodness. Moral uprightness with backbone, generosity that sometimes requires real courage. The final three describe a believer's internal governance, character under pressure. Pistis, faithfulness. Reliability. The kind of person whose word can be trusted over years, not days. Prots, gentleness, often mistranslated as weakness. It actually means strength, restrained on purpose. Enkratia, self-control. Mastery over impulse, appetite, and reaction, not by suppression but by a deeper governing center. Notice what's missing from every single one of these 9 words. Not one of them is a feeling you can fake for a photograph. Every one requires time to verify. You cannot demonstrate faithfulness in a single afternoon. You can only demonstrate it by still being faithful years later. That's the built-in proof that this list was never meant to be produced by short bursts of effort. Here's the part most readers of Galatians 5 never connect to anything else in the New Testament. Turn to John chapter 15, and Jesus is in the upper room, hours before his arrest. I am the true vine, he tells his disciples, and my Father is the gardener. Abide in me, he says, as I abide in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. Same word. Karpos. Fruit. The exact concept Paul will later build his entire argument around. Jesus is explicit about the mechanism. Apart from me, you can do nothing. Not, you can do a little less. Nothing. A branch severed from the vine doesn't produce lesser fruit. It produces none. This reframes the entire question a believer is tempted to ask about the fruit of the Spirit. The wrong question is, how do I produce more patience? More self-control? The right question, according to Jesus, is, am I abiding? Am I staying connected to the source? A branch doesn't grip the vine harder through effort. A branch simply remains attached, and the sap does the rest. Fruit was never the branch's job. Fruit is what happens automatically when connection to the vine is real. This is why Paul, writing to Galatia, never once tells his readers to try harder at kindness. His prescription is different. Walk by the Spirit, he says a few verses earlier, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. Walking. A rhythm of ongoing dependence, not a burst of moral effort. Jesus adds one more detail in John 15 that unsettles a lot of readers the first time they notice it. Every branch that does bear fruit, my Father prunes, so that it will be even more fruitful. Not just the unfruitful branches get cut. The fruitful ones get cut too. Vinedressers in the ancient world pruned productive vines deliberately, cutting away healthy growth. Left unpruned, a vine spends its energy on excess leaves and unproductive shoots instead of fruit. The gardener's knife isn't removing what's precious. It's removing what's competing with what's precious. For a believer, this reframes suffering, loss, and difficulty in a way that's easy to miss. A hardship that feels like loss may, in the vine's logic, be a pruning cut rather than a punishment. Not every difficulty is correction for wrongdoing. Some of it is simply preparation for more fruit. This matches exactly what Paul describes happening in a life increasingly filled with the Spirit's fruit. Patience is often grown, not in comfort, but in circumstances that would otherwise produce impatience. Gentleness is often grown, not in ease, but in situations that would otherwise justify harshness. The pruning and the fruit are not opposites. In the vine's economy, one produces the other. Paul closes his list of 9 with a short, almost throwaway line that carries the entire argument's punchline. Against such things there is no law. On the surface, it sounds like a mild summary. Underneath, it's a direct answer to the Judaizers. Remember their argument. You need the law, on top of the Spirit, to be truly righteous. Paul's response, show me the law that could improve on love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness. No court, no legal code, anywhere, prohibits a person for having too much genuine kindness. The law was never capable of producing this list. It could only ever restrain the list's opposite. A life full of Spirit-grown fruit doesn't need law from the outside, because it's already fulfilling what law was reaching for. This is Paul's real answer to legalism. Not, ignore the law. Something bigger, outgrow the law's whole method. Law changes behavior by external command. The Spirit changes behavior by growing new character from the inside. One produces compliance for as long as someone's watching. The other produces fruit whether anyone's watching or not. Picture 2 identical bowls of fruit sitting side by side on a kitchen table. One bowl is real. Grown slowly, from roots, through seasons, dependent on rain and light it never controlled. The other bowl is plastic. Manufactured in a factory, assembled to look correct from across the room. From a distance, both bowls look the same. 9 matching shapes, 9 matching colors. Get close enough to touch them, and the difference becomes obvious immediately. Real fruit has weight, imperfection, a faint give under pressure, an actual connection to something alive. Plastic fruit is smooth, symmetrical, and permanently unripe. It never grew, so it can never mature. Most people spend years trying to manufacture patience, manufacture kindness, manufacture self-control. Assembling the appearance of the list through willpower, one strained imitation at a time. Paul's letter to the Galatians offers a different way, quieter and slower, but the only way that produces the real thing. Stop manufacturing the fruit. Start abiding in the vine. Karpos, singular. One source. 9 expressions. A single, unified life, grow. Every quality on that list is simply a description of his own character, offered to grow in anyone who stays connected to him. Not a checklist to complete. A life to abide in.